Have you introduce yourself first, please?
Yes,
Thank you.
I'm Dan Monk with UC Cooperative Extension, Fresno County, Cotton Irrigation and Soils Farm Advisor. So today, I thought a couple of things I'd like to try to do, kind of bring us up to where we're at right now in terms of management of cotton, and then just sort of what we might anticipate going forward the next few weeks in terms of how we can finish this crop off. But since everybody's kind of taken a few minutes to talk about UC and its situation and all, I'll make a couple of just real brief comments. In 1990, when I came on board with Cooperative Extension in Fresno County, we had a total of 16 farm advisors with one, in addition to that, a cross-county assignment. We're down to 6 farm advisors now at the county level, and as Pete had indicated, you know, there's a lot of attrition there and not a lot of rehiring, and so that's how UC has been dealing with its difficult budget, because so much of its budget goes into employees. So that's really the situation. Because I have irrigation and soils responsibilities, I've continued to maintain those in other crops in addition to cotton, but we still do have a significant cotton crop out there, and I certainly am going to maintain my commitment to the cotton industry, and you know, hopefully you know, just coming up here to see a good group is really a positive thing for me, and something that we need to you know, I plan on maintaining for some years to come. So thanks for welcoming me, and thanks for the invitation. Marcia, obviously it's a wonderful place to be, and you know, it's always good to have good grower cooperators that want to work with us to conduct some of the research that we we need to develop and maintain. One of the big areas of research, of course, right now is the Fusarium wilt issue. I'm not going to really cover that much, but I don't think you know, you can come out to a cotton meeting, and not talk about it. It's something that's sort of delayed in terms of its moving into the northern parts of the cotton area here in the San Joaquin Valley, but it continues to be a big issue. And the way that we're dealing with it largely right now is through good variety management, and introducing and evaluating new materials for resistance to Fusarium race 4. So today I'd like to talk a little bit about, you know, where we're at with the crop, and really, as you can see, some fields we're beginning to see a lot of bloom move towards the top of the plant. And one of the ways that we acknowledge that and really describe it is by looking at the bloom that's on the first position. So obviously there's multiple positions out on a branch. Our first position fruit is the one where this is blooming right now, and you can see that this particular plant is at one node above yellow flower, or white flower, I guess this is. And so I just want to pass that around and let you take a look at that. It's pretty clear that this plant is in deep cutout. This plant has just another additional couple of nodes on it, but the way we evaluate that is to look at the top leaf on the plant that's at least a quarter in diameter, or 1 inch in diameter in size, and then we count the number of nodes down from that. So here we have 1, 2, before we come to that first flower here. So you can see here that this is 2 nodes above white flower, and again, this is an indicator of plant cutout. Okay, I'm going to come back to that. So I gave you a little bit of a handout, and I want to talk a little bit about how we got to this place where we're at right now. Basically, you know, early in the season, to mark plant development, the thing that we want to look at is node number. That gives us a sense of age. That gives us a sense of how old the plant is, how mature that is. So simple node counts early in the season are something that we want to look for, because we know that somewhere between nodes 5 and about 7, sometimes 8, we're going to expect our first fruit. And of course, you know, we want to manage around you know, what is happening with the fruit load and with the presence of a fruit load, whether it's lower on the plant, higher on the plant. That's going to impact some of our decisions later on. So early on, we look at things like node number, we look at things like height to node ratio. A high height to node ratio tells you that there's a large number. It's a tall plant for the number of nodes or for the development stage that it's in. But as we get later in the season, height to node ratio is not quite as important. And it's simply because plant vigor is not the only thing that's now driving maturity. So when we go out and we're looking at fields and we're trying to manage for maturity and evaluate maturity, we want to look at something called nodes above white flower. That's a much better indicator that tells us where we are in relation to cutout. So what is cutout? In the cotton industry, we talk about cutout quite a bit. Who wants to take a stab at that?
Not growing anymore.
Not growing anymore. Anybody else want to offer something more than Tom did?
Yeah, I'm simple.
Plants try to put all its energy to finish up what it's set, and it's not worried about vegetative growth.
I like that a lot better. So basically, what we're trying to do late in the season is we're trying to identify when we're going to harvest, or when that last pickable boll is going to be made, and when is that produced? When does that occur? And if we can look at that, now we can manage that boll, that location, and we can manage that to finish the season. And if we continue to try to push that crop beyond that point much, we're going to end up spending a lot of resources that we may not need to. So basically, the idea that once we get to cutout, we want to continue to manage, but yes, the large majority of the resources that the plant is developing, those carbohydrates, the sugars that are being produced, they're largely now going to be directed into the development of the fruit. Very little will after that point will be devoted to vegetative, continuing to grow that plant vegetatively. And that's a fine line, depending upon the type of determinacy that you have. And some plants are certainly much more determinate in nature. In other words, they're going to go into cutout more intensely and more definitively than an indeterminate variety will. So, what is the variety, Tom, that we're growing back here?
725.
725. So, one of the things that we can look at with this particular plant is it does have a pretty good boll load on it. There's a normal plant population out there, I don't know, 45, 50,000?
60.
Closer to 60,000 plants per acre. You can see that after we get above the cotyledons down, way down here, okay, we do have several nodes, 1, 2, 3, 4. They just sort of dropped. We've got a vegetative branch, we've got another vegetative branch, another vegetative branch, and then it went into fruiting. And now we have 2 bolls, okay, followed by, and now we're going to have fruiting branches above that, right? So we've got another 2 bolls, so there's 4, there's 5, there's 6, there's 7, there's 8 bolls. We've got a flower on the second position there. There's 9 bolls, and there should be, oh, that's missing 1 there. So we've got 9 bolls on this plant, and typically on a 60,000 per acre, I just picked this sort of at random, that's going to result in some pretty good yield.
Well, my wife spent all morning sewing those damn things on there.
Nice super glue.
So I guess the point is if we're looking at the field behind us, we've got a field that's got a yellow or a white flower on there, about 2 nodes above white flower. We may or may not pick this. We know also that in Acela varieties, the largest bolls and the most production is going to come lower in the plant, right? So we're making all of this crop down here, and certainly we'd like to harvest a few more bolls up on top, but they're going to be much smaller, and they're not going to provide the yield that we'd like to say. So that's where we start to discuss the 95% zone. That is the number of branches that it takes to make 95% of the yield. And so if we do make this boll here that's now a flower, we would anticipate that would be outside the 95% zone. Okay, so can we harvest it? Yes. How important is it? That's another question. Okay, so the idea here is that we've got a plant now that is basically, if we manage it correctly, if we continue to feed it, if we continue to mature some of these top positions here, and again, there's 2 bolls on this branch right here. If we continue to maintain that growth, we're going to end up with some pretty decent yields already. And here we are, still in July, making that point. So that field went into to cut out fairly early. Is that something that we can modify at this stage of the game? It really depends on if this is an average plant in the field or not. Okay, and that's where monitoring comes in, and that's where identifying representative areas of the field are extremely important when we're making management decisions. Okay, so as the diagram now on the handout that I have gives you a sense for how Pema and Acela cotton differ, but also what happens and what to expect in terms of cutout. Generally speaking, and this is a general statement but basically, if we look at Acela cottons, we're looking at somewhere between about 4.5 and 5 nodes as being that mark for cutout, or that place for cutout. So will we after 4 to 4.5 nodes or 5 nodes, will we continue to make cotton? Yes, we can. And yes, we probably want to still harvest some of those bolls. But again, that's a minority of the crop that we expect to harvest. And this is sort of a diagram that shows a linear and steady decline in nodes above white flower, or nodes above flower. In the case of the Pema, it's a yellow flower. In Pema cottons, because of the fact that they're a much smaller boll, only about 1/3 of the size of an Acela boll, it takes 3 times as many to make equivalent yield. And in fact, because of its more indeterminate growth, it's going to go into cutout much later in the season. And generally, we think of nodes above white flower at about 3.5 to be at that point where we're at cutout. So Pema cutout occurs much later. If we look at effective boll period, it's roughly about 45 days for Pema cotton. In Acelas, we're looking at probably closer to a 30-day boll set period. And there's certainly variations among that, but that's fairly typical. So most of our crop is made from day one of first flower, and within about 30 days, 95% or more of your crop is made in that short period of time. So 4 weeks is about all you have. In the case of a late planting system like last year, where we saw bloom going way late. We saw bloom going into, many times in the 10th or 12th of July. Some people didn't really go into formal bloom until the 15th of July. This year, we're a couple of weeks early. Some fields, 10 days early. But basically, we're in that range in terms of earliness. Now, why is earliness important to us? Why is it that we want to have a boll or a flower occur as early as possible in the season? It's an established fact that the higher the heat units, that's a very close relationship. The higher the heat units early in the season, the higher yield statewide yield we tend to have. So if we look, for instance, at the crop behind me, it was planted a little bit later, but it's also being managed very different than the field across the way here. Okay. But early bloom, what happens with early bloom? If we go into bloom, for instance, in June, let's say the 20th or the 25th of June, we're going into bloom during a period where we have extremely long days. The longest days of the years occur right then and there. Okay, and so we do have actually additional, and the other point is that the new cotton leaf that's being produced, it has about 20 days of a peak performance. After about 20 days, the conversion of light into sugars and the efficiency of that leaf begins to decline. So we'd like to produce as much as we can early in the season. There's also some issues with, so as we get into August and we're beginning to set some of our blooms in August, we've got shorter days and we've got older leaves. So there's only so much that we can continue to produce late in the season. So these are some of the concepts or some of the physiology behind how it is that we can have a year like last year. Considering the lateness of the crop, we actually did pretty darn good. Even the Pema growers would agree that the lateness of the crop, we did about as good as we could in terms of management. And this year we've got the possibility of a jump on a really great year in terms of cotton. Extremely high retention. And I want to thank Pete for that little diagram, because that's exactly right. We are producing about as much cotton as we can right now physiologically, in terms of our climate, in terms of our soil, in terms of how we're managing things right now. We do definitely have some ideal conditions for crop set and maturity. And all we're really trying to do right now, since we've got very low insect pressures, all we're really trying to do is maintain what it is that we already have. Now, if we talk about the Pema system, the Pema system is going to, again, be very different. There's still a lot of time to manage and control that plant. Over here, we still have some opportunities at nodes above white flower at about 6. And I'm just guessing. Tom, where would you guess it is right now?
About 5 or 6. About 6, probably.
Maybe 6 right now. So we do have some time. Now, is this line in stone? This decline after the number of days of first flower, is that decline in stone? Absolutely not. I talked to, well, you all know Bruce Roberts, good former extension man, and now with Fresno State. Bruce had a field over at Fresno State that kind of got away from him this year, and on those sandy loams, that's easier to do. And over a week ago, he says, Dan, we've got a field that's 4 nodes above white flower. Am I going to be able to, what are some of the things that we can do to push this crop a little bit more? So we did talk about the problem of within an 8, and his field didn't go into bloom until after the 1st of July. So he was seeing a very rapid decline in you see where that Y is right there on the that little Y below the Kayla line? That's about where his plant was on that data point right there. So he basically, because of the early management, probably a lack of water for the most part. I don't know the nitrogen status or some of the history behind it, but you can go into fairly, you can move towards that cutout line pretty fast if you're not careful early in the season. So the idea for Bruce that we talked about is how to limit the use of PICs, for instance, methylquat. We don't need to control growth. We don't need to rein it in, vegetative growth. We need to kind of push that crop right now. So one of the things that he's done is gone back and looked at his petiole nitrogen levels and basically irrigation scheduling. And from here on out, he's going to try to reduce the amount of stress that he has in that field, push it a little bit, but not to the point where because we can't push the crop too far into the situation where we actually start to after the some bolls load up, you can actually drop some bolls because of the increased or the decreased light environment that's caused by additional vegetative growth if you really push it late in the season. So there is a balance there, and there's also control and approaches that we can use to manage the crop and try to manage it actually in a way that's fairly stable and steady, so that we get a progression of nodes above white flower decline in a manner that's approaching this type of a relationship here. So a fairly steady, slow decline. In Pema cotton down at the south end of the county, we've got a little bit different problem. We've got fields that are being drip irrigated. Sometimes we're providing plenty of water for some of those fields. They're coming out of tomatoes, so there's a lot of nitrogen in the system, and these plants are holding their nodes above white flower at about 8 or 9. So there's another situation where we need to think a couple of weeks down the road as we approach that August 15th, August 20th date, where we really, in terms of heat units, in terms of time, we want to try to time that nodes above white flower so that we can go into cutout right about the time that we have those last bolls that will actually physically be able to set and mature. So those are some of the range of conditions that we have out there. But right now, I agree with some of the comments here earlier. Countywide, I've been down in Kings County a fair amount. I think statewide the reports are that retention is good. The crop looks probably the best it has in many years, but there is still opportunities for management going forward over the next couple of weeks that we'll need to, still be vigilant. But things are looking very positive. So I gave you some thoughts, some points, some bullet points here that if you want to take a look at some of those, I think that might be helpful in terms of the management of nodes above white flower. I think it's probably these are the last days of opportunities where we can manage maturity and manage the crop. But there's absolutely opportunities for control. So with that, I'll just kind of end my comments unless there's some questions that are out there.
Back to nutrition and Philip's
Sure.
question about humates. I was wondering, with John Texera being an organic farmer for quite a while, have you seen any correlation, John?
I'm mostly using compost to build the soil for my end uses. I haven't really added any humates. Just a few of them. There was a couple of them. I just don't know which one to use because you hear so many. It's who's the relationship with the salesman? Does he have it better than the other guy? It'd be nice to find out what really does work or some kind of a better consensus.
Yeah, it's really complex organic chemistry.
Yeah,
and
it's stimulating.
Very poorly understood.
Maybe I'll make a comment
Sure.
on that.
Sure.
I don't think any recent work has been done on humic acid, on soil structure and so forth, but the work that was done a number of years ago generally showed, humic acid is well known. Any kind of organic matter that's worked into the soil, as well as humic acid itself, will have a positive effect oftentimes on soil structure. However, the question always comes in whether it's cost effective to do this on a large acreage, or whether it's really worth the cost of humic acid on some soil types. And that's where a lot of the research, at least some time ago, said essentially no, that the cost effectiveness isn't so positive. But that's at least from memory of what some of the research was done a number of years ago.
That might have been before nitrogen prices went up as high as it did.
Yeah. Possibly.
That economic analysis might be different.
True enough. Whether or not you can actually improve, the issue is one of when you can have impact on nitrogen efficiency with humic acid. That's another discussion, because humic acid is mainly for soil structure and other water infiltration and those issues.
What do you consider, what's your opinion as to what the ideal high temperature for Kala and Pema cottons are? When we get above a certain temperature, or respiration too high, or what's the best highs that we're looking at?
Sure. Variety plays a critical role in whether or not a plant is going to maintain its fertility during high temperature periods. So, and actually, this is not work that we, do on a regular basis, but it is work that the breeders do on a regular basis, and they know which lines will refute pollen sterility when you get to those very high temperatures, because that's the primary issue. So they do look at that, they build that into the varieties, and then that's part of the testing program that's been done for so many years. That's very questionable going forward, is how will these varieties perform under different environmental conditions up and down the valley going forward. So in general, okay, I would say that it's not very common to see a significant pollen sterility occurring at temperatures below 105, 106, 107. As you go up from there, you do see that. There are also some other issues related to recovery and early morning temperatures, respiration being a key factor there. And so actually sometimes our high-low temperatures are more of a problem, or can be more of a problem, because of the recovery issues and the ability and so sometimes we can get some sloughing off of some bolls in response to that. So as we get morning lows above about 70, 172, sometimes 73 degrees, that's when you begin to increase your likelihood again for some retention issues with squares, young bolls. I know Pete and I have had some of this conversation over the years as to whether or not something's been lost as a result of ligus, or whether it's been lost physiologically later in the season. Do you have any comments in addition to that, Pete?
Well, if I can place a blame on you as physiologist, that's what I'll do. And you do the same back to the entomologist. No, you're absolutely right. It's that, I'm always reminded of what my first county director taught me, and that was, he was a good old Arkansas boy, Hodge Black, and he said, good people weather is good cotton weather. So if it's a nice cool night, you open up your windows and you let the air flow, that's what you want. If it's too hot to open up because it's 75, then it's a bit more of a problem. But I think one of the things we're seeing too is when you hear about a high nighttime temperature, bear in mind if that's in Fresno or one of the major cities that has maybe more of a heat load than you would out in this area where you might get some flow, or a Fireball where you might get a little bit more flow. It may not be completely identical, because I don't think we've had quite the stifling nighttime temperatures that, at least out here in the field, that we have in the past, where you get that really strong monsoonal effect where the humidity's high and there's a blanket over us. So I often think it's more that high nighttime temperature is more of an effect than even the...
I think it was that early last week we had a day where we had some pretty humid, warm morning temperatures, but really it is additive, and so sustained temperatures and days of weather like that are probably the most concern. Also the timing. So the time as we get into as we move this bloom up the plant, the later in maturity we are. Usually during peak flower is that period that's most susceptible to that kind of a condition. As we get later in the season, as we get into to August or we get into 10 or 12 days past cutout, we begin to diminish the chance that you're going to start losing fruit as a result of makeable fruit as a result of the climatic conditions.
Same for Pema.
Pemas are, I would say they're now similar, and that's why we can grow them in the valley. That was the big issue and why we didn't plant Pema cotton in the valley before the 1980s. Actually, we did, but we found that those experiments in the 40s and 50s just weren't possible. And so as we got into as Arizona, as USDA and Arizona got into their breeding program and they identified varieties that had high heat tolerance, now they were able to develop an S6, and then from there it just took off here in the valley, didn't it? That S6 variety was a key because it had good heat tolerance, improved by S7. S7 was a little more determinate, had the high heat tolerance, and now we've got successive varieties now that have taken over, and one of the big reasons is because of that introduction of some of the heat tolerance to those varieties.
Let's talk about fiber quality for a second. Leaving aside things like rain at harvest and stuff like that, but it's the physiological part of while cotton is growing, that what effect the heat would have on fiber quality and what effect the boll position. I mean, it would stand to reason that you'd get lower quality as you move up the plant, but I'm not sure that that's true.
Yeah, good questions, and that's certainly very germane right now as we look at the fact that we've set a lot of crop, but we also have to manage. And like I say, as we get to that top crop, we want to manage the top of that crop now so that we have good fiber quality. The San Joaquin Valley is probably one of the best places. It is one of the best places in the world in terms of its climate relative to fiber development. And one of the reasons why we have such a good we've had that one variety law over the years. The climate is ideal. But there are definitely circumstances that compromise fiber development. So as we look at the flower, we're basically looking at about a 21-day period after flower in which about 95 or more % of the length of cotton of that fiber is developed. Just in a simple 21-day period, that single cell that's jetting out right now from the seed. Itself it takes about 21 days to get almost all of its length, and then what happens after that is you get a lot of secondary filling, okay, and that secondary growth generally matures or that finalizes at about a 40-day period, and then after that you get a desiccation. So really, physiologically speaking, if you do something to this plant tomorrow, in other words, you stop irrigating it tomorrow. The plant's not going to respond tomorrow to that stop in irrigation. We've got soil reserves, we've got plant reserves in terms of nitrogen and its reallocation into the bolls and that sort of thing. So there is a lot of buffering in that system, but in terms of getting a full mature bowl, in terms of its ideal sort of balance between enough secondary filling and too much filling, which can occur in situations where you have a lot of old bowls and they set early and very early, and then you kind of continue growth of the plant, and you sustain the growth of the plant over a long period of time. That would be situations for what kind of micronair? High or low? High micronair, because you have that additional filling. And what is micronair? It's simply the measurement of airflow through a cotton sample, isn't it? So the more rigid or the more mature that fiber, the more airflow you're going to get through that sample. So that would be a high mic cotton. On the other hand, bowls produced late in time and that don't quite have enough time, or maybe they just barely have enough time to open up and go into the hopper basket, they tend to be low in mic, don't they? Because they don't have a lot of that secondary wall thickening process going on. And so you actually get a collapse in the fiber, and therefore that collapse results in what? Problem with airflow, right? So that would be a low mic situation. So in a year like this, where we've got much of our crop already developing, and what sort of micronair, what might you expect?
High.
Well, it could be a little bit high. We certainly don't expect low mic conditions this year, unless something very extreme and unusual happens. But yeah, I would expect sort of normal to if anything, maybe on the little bit higher side. But because of our climate, because of the conditions that the plant grows in here in the valley, I would expect right now, everything tells me that we're going to have a good quality year, a good production year. And what was your other point, Phil? It had to do with bottom to top.
Yeah, is there a difference?
So a lot of this work was done in the 80s, and we continued it as I got on with extension in the early 90s, and we did look at Tom Kirby, for instance, was involved in a lot of this research, where we actually did some of the first box mapping in the country. We're basically looking at the positions, and we'd actually take a bunch of plants and do this over different trials and different situations, and we'd actually identify, and we'd take the bowl from that first bowl down on the first position, and we'd put that in one box, and then we'd take the second bowl on the first position and put that in another box, and then we took the second position out on the first fruiting branch and put that in another box, and we sort of analyzed the quality and the yield components of those bowls. And what we tended to find is exactly what you were saying, Philip. We were seeing the largest bowls tend to be on the second and third fruiting branches, and then they steadily decline after that, and on the first position. So right up next to that main stem is where you get the longest, strongest fiber, and then upward you actually get a slight diminishing, especially as you get up to about nodes fruiting branch number 7 and 8, you get a slow decline, and as you get to about 9, above the first fruiting branch, you get a pretty precipitous decline in maturity and size. So that goes back to that 95% zone that we talked about earlier, and why that's an important value. Do we need to continue to put on that one bowl up here, and maybe that one bowl that's way out here? That becomes the risk issue there.
What's the most important nutrient?
What's the most important nutrient?
Or
depends. It's the one that's lacking.
Water.
good one.
So I mean, we've had situations where this onset of sort of a late season failure. We've seen that, but tends to be further south on lighter soils. Some of that was associated with potassium and nitrogen deficiencies. There's never been one nutrient. Generally, of course, the main nutrient that we're applying to perhaps every field or near every field out there is nitrogen. And so I will say that all of the work that we did, and during the from about 2001 2002 to about 2007, we did quite a bit of work on nitrogen, and we found that basically, for most growers, they were not under fertilizing with nitrogen. And we also found that cotton, as you all probably know, and I think you do know, it's an efficient miner of nitrogen. So if we're coming behind cotton, look at that taproot. Okay, we're just seeing the thickest and biggest part of that taproot. But this is an example of a typical and an ideal one that a grower really wants to manage. He wants to manage that plant because it's tapping not only into the top 2 feet here, but you can imagine that fibrous root system below that can continue to take up nutrients and water into the 3rd foot, 4th foot, and in some soils we see a lot of water taken out of the 5th and 6th, and some out of the 7th, sometimes 8th foot at the end of the season, at the very end of the season. So that root system is extremely important to us. It's characterized, it does have mycorrhiza on it, so it's a little better and more efficient at taking up water and nutrients. Phosphates in particular are why we don't, one of the reasons why we don't why we don't apply phosphorus. The plant takes up a lot of phosphorus, but we don't apply phosphorus because of its high efficiency in phosphorus uptake.
Has there been any correlation as finishing up bulb development and being a shortage of potassium? As far as phosphorus, you know, he said he uses a good uptake, but there's, and I don't know if that's what David said. Is that what you're, as far as maturation?
Yeah,
potassium nitrate towards the end of the season?
I'm just thinking, you know, you think of potassium as being the energy currency of the carbon
So-
fixation importance, and how does that affect your fiber quality?
Yeah. So now going back to nitrogen just for a moment, how many are monitoring their petiole nitrogen levels right now?
That's my question is the water run, if you're short, hit it right now, then would you use can 17 or UN 32? I have a ranch I can't get the water all around, but it's loaded really good. And I think it's running out of gas. And I want to make that top crop.
Well, given what we've just discussed, I'm going to turn it around on you. That field right there, am I going to run can 17 on that, or another nitrogen to finish that crop off right there?
What's the petiole?
What's the petiole level? Let's say it's 10,000 parts per million, or let's say it's 5,000 parts per million. 5,000 parts per million.
It needs it.
Okay. So the argument is how late are we going to try to push that crop across the street here? Okay. Many would say that to try to get, if in fact that average plant out there is at 2 nodes above white flower, and there's still some significant nitrogen in the above 5,000 parts per million, that still may be enough to finish that crop off. The question might be, is that a determinate or indeterminate enough variety that I can kind of reverse some of where it's at right now? Can I continue to push that? Can I try to make those blooms? And because we're so far into cutout, 4 nodes above white flower, I might say there's a lot more opportunity, and I would say absolutely you want to push that. At 2 nodes above white flower, we're really pushing it, and if we're not showing extreme nitrogen deficiency, we probably have enough in that plant to redistribute to still maintain or finish up some of those bulls. So I guess on the earliest situation out there that we see, if that let's say that is, we're kind of past how much we can gain from our late management like this. In terms of this crop here, very different story. And so the availability of nitrogen is really going to depend on not so much the form that you apply it in, but whether or not there's an active root system ready to take it up, and as you might imagine, after this irrigation here, we're going to start over. We're going to start depleting the top foot again, the 2nd foot again, and then eventually the 3rd foot. And during that time, there's still a lot of opportunity for nitrogen uptake.
What about potassium nitrate?
Potassium nitrate, yeah, that is an issue. Late season, we have such a large boll load that potassium can be much more of an issue. And generally when we see potassium deficiency symptoms, right, it's at the end of the season, isn't it? It's usually at or after cutout. So now is the time to read your potassium levels. Now is the time to get out your file that has your soil potassium levels and remind yourself, is this an opportunity? Is this a high boll load period where potassium, perhaps some foliars, would be appropriate? And the work that Bill Weir has done over the years, and I'm surprised Bill's not with us today, but he would tell you, and he's probably done probably the most work in the UC system on potassium. Bill would say that multiple applications are going to give you more of a response or more of a possibility for response than a single application. So something that might have been applied recently, anticipating this kind of a boll load, anticipating this kind of a season, followed by a second and perhaps even a third low biuret application is something that's going to, potassium nitrate or other potassium material is something that could, depending upon that soil history and what you know about that, could definitely be responsive and produce more yield for you late season in particular. I've talked a lot. I'm going to be around for a while. I don't want to take over any of Dan's time here, and I know there's a lot of interesting things we want to hear about on alfalfa. So I do have a couple of plants here. These are both were in fields that had some phenoxy injury earlier in the season. One more extreme than the other. But if you'd like to talk a little bit about that later on, like I say, I'll be around to take
They will fully
any
recover,
questions.
in your opinion, from that injury?
Well, I think we've seen. Well, you're keeping me out here, aren't you, Dan? We've definitely seen in many of these fields extremely good boll loading in many of the fields that were hit. These were generally fairly light, low dose, but as you went out there, you could see that there are some very significant injury symptoms on these early plants. The timing of the injury plays a big role in the recovery. The thing that happens with phenoxies and many herbicides that are difficult to for the plant to break down is that they tend to dilute over time. So that as that plant grows and gets larger and more biomass, the dilution finally gets to the point where you just don't see symptoms anymore. This is a much higher application. This was actually a tank issue, not a drift issue on this plant here. But as you can see, it is recovering quite well. We got a lot of
That's a drift issue. That's from the.
No, this one is the drift field, Tom.
Oh, it is.
That
Is
you
that
gave
something you
me.
brought?
You don't
Okay,
you
okay.
barely notice any leaf injury symptoms here.
Okay.
That's the plant you gave me, Tom. And then on this field here, this was a spray tank issue. It's awfully late, but look at the number of bolls that plant has. Look at the bloom and look at the. This is going to be a late field, but it definitely has the potential here to yield quite high. But this was an application that went on 7, 8 nodes, maybe nine nodes, and then it continued for about 6 nodes beyond that. So it's very much going to be delayed. I anticipate there could be some issues with quality, within a more extreme example like this, whereas a plant that's beginning to have maybe only a slight delay in maturity, probably there's enough time and enough opportunity for that plant to carry through the condition. And as you can see, it's this is a fairly high density planting too, isn't it, Tom?
Thank you, Dan.
Did that take
Thank
care of
you.
that, Dan? Yep. Thank you.